Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today you've been waiting quite a while for this, but we're back with more of the complete Doctor Strange. I'll have the links to the first parts in the description down below, but previously I showed off my complete run of Strange Tales, starting with issue 110, running up through the end of Doctor Strange in 183. I no longer have those books, but before I sold them, I did a video to show off that whole run. But that wasn't the end of my run. I actually still have the rest of the run. So at one point I had all the Doctor Strange issues from Strange Tales 110, which I think was 1963, up through about 1988. So I had 25 years of Doctor Strange. I still have the rest of them. So we're going to be jumping in with part 3, where we see what happened to Doctor Strange after his series ended with issue 183. Now, for those who aren't familiar and didn't watch those videos, after Strange Tales 168, in the summer of 1968, Marvel greatly expanded their line of comics. I won't get into all the reasons behind that. It gets a little complicated, but the split books split in half, and Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., got his own title starting with issue 1, and Doctor Strange took over Strange Tales, renamed it Doctor Strange, starting with issue 169. Unfortunately, it didn't last very long. It only made it to issue 183 before that series was canceled. And then Doctor Strange kind of disappeared a little bit, and that's where we're going to jump in here. There was about 2 years where he didn't have his own title. He only made a couple of guest appearances over that period. But then he came back in a big way. So let's start first, though, with a book that came out not too long after his series was canceled, courtesy of Roy Thomas. Now, Roy, of course, Roy had been writing Doctor Strange before it ended, and Roy, as you know, is a huge continuity nerd, and so basically he was writing... one of the other titles he was writing was Namor the Submariner, and so not too long after Doctor Strange, the series ended, we have here Submariner 22, which has a guest appearance by Doctor Strange that ties up the loose ends from Doctor Strange 183. It was canceled, and there were some subplots and stuff that hadn't been resolved. Those were resolved here in Submariner number 22. Then he didn't appear for a while, like over a year, I think, no appearances at all. He was in guest appearance in Submariner 34 and 35, which was a story that was sort of like a prototype for the Defenders. I do have those somewhere, but they're not with my Doctor Strange collection, and they're not as important as what I'm about to show you. Because what happens after that is this, and I'm not showing this for the reasons you might think. So here we have Marvel Feature number 1, the first appearance of the Defenders. And this is where Doctor Strange suddenly comes back in a big way, and there's a couple factors that go into that. And the big factor that goes into it is that right around this time, and this is cover dated December 1971. In November of 1971, the Comics Code changed their rules, and that is what allowed a lot of the Bronze Age to happen. This loosened a lot of the rules, and that's where you get this sudden surge in horror comics. And so Doctor Strange sort of fit right into that. Marvel also massively expanded their line of comics in 1972, putting out all these new titles. And part of that we get here right at the end of 1971. We get the first appearance of the Defenders, but also, in addition to Doctor Strange reappearing as a member of the Defenders team, this is a really sort of underrated key issue, because if you go inside this comic, it's got the Defender story, then it's got a Submariner reprint, and then it has this, The Return. And this is actually a Doctor Strange solo story. So here we get, in this issue, this is sort of like the lost issue of Doctor Strange. Takes place well after 183, but before his next solo series starts. So if you're a Doctor Strange completist, you'll need to get this both because it's the first appearance of the Defenders, which is really important. Obviously, Doctor Strange is one of the main characters in Defenders, but also it's got this Doctor Strange solo series that begins here in the backup and then quickly continues over here. And this is another book that I think is massively, massively underrated. It's Marvel Premiere number 3. I have a really nice copy of this, which I'm very happy about, because, again, this is actually the first issue of the new Doctor Strange series. What happens is he appears in Marvel Premiere numbers 3 through 14, and then based on the popularity of the series and the sales, they give him his own title again, and the storyline continues basically. It's a little bit of a different storyline, but the next storyline picks up right where 14 leaves off with new issue 1. So this is one of these things where the fact that this is the first issue of the new series gets sort of lost just because of the numbering. Like if this just said Doctor Strange number 1 instead of Marvel Premiere number 3, it would be worth 5 times as much as it is. The other things about it is it has a really difficult black frame cover. So the black frame covers are always hard to find in high grade, and it's got a cover and interior arts by Barry Windsor Smith. So it's got everything going for it. First issue, Barry Smith, hard to find in top grade. So, I mean, my copy is not exactly a near mint, but it's really nice. There's a little ding there by the spine, a couple little tiny pulls by the bottom staple. I mean, I think this is probably, without looking at the back or taking it out or just looking at the front, I think this is a solid 8. And it's a beautiful book and really important, again, first issue. And this run is excellent. So let's jump here, issue 4. Now, one thing that's really strange about this run, no pun intended, is that the creative team for that first issue, number 3, is completely gone by issue 4. So they actually did this quite a bit at the time, particularly with things with Roy Thomas was involved. I think it might be because this is right around the time he became editor-in-chief. There's a number of books where he basically does the first issue, where they come up with a concept or whatever, or the first appearance of a character, like the first appearance of Iron Fist, which is directly follows this run. And then so Roy will do the first issue, and then a whole new creative team comes in for the second issue. And that's what happens here. This says, do you dare enter the world of the weird? If so, read on. And then we have this thing down here, the Spawn of Sligoth. Now, what's really interesting about this book, a couple things. First of all, the new writer is DC stalwart Gardner Fox, who is like one of the big DC writers of all time. And over at DC, they had this thing where basically a bunch of the old guard got together and they wanted to, I don't know if they were actually like trying to unionize, but they basically wanted to get some benefits, you know, health insurance, retirement, that sort of thing. We're talking people that built DC Comics, people that have been with them since the beginning of the Golden Age and have been working at DC for 25 years. And what DC did was they fired all of them. So all of these old veteran guys were suddenly out there looking for work. Gardner Fox comes on as the new writer of Doctor Strange's issue 4, and he's doing this really interesting thing that's clearly a Lovecraft pastiche. I feel like early 70s, late 60s, early 70s was like when counterculture, you know, sci-fi, fantasy, sort of started going a little more mainstream. And there was a big thing of, I think, around that time, people finding Conan, people discovering like Lord of the Rings, and people discovering H.P. Lovecraft. And so this is clearly, like, very obviously a Lovecraft inspired tale, heavily inspired. And I think it's excellent. What's odd about this story is that despite the fact that I think it's great, there's a lot of complaints in the letter column about it. And they're like, it doesn't feel like a Marvel comic. It doesn't feel like Doctor Strange. My response to that is, well, Doctor Strange got canceled, right? So what do you want? We want something new, obviously, because what they were doing before didn't work. But the response from the editors in letter column is basically like, we agree that didn't really work, so we're going to bring in someone else, and we'll get to that in a minute. So here's issue 6 again. It says The Shambler from the Sea, which is not exactly Cthulhu, but it's all very, very heavily inspired by Lovecraft. Design note, we got this brief period here for a couple issues, issues 6 and 7, where we have the semi-frame, where they got rid of the rest of the frame, but they still have the thing at the top. I love this era as well. I prefer the frame era, but I love the semi-frame era. Now strikes Dagoth. I think these issues are really, really underrated. Forget about the value, but just I think these are really cool stories. Issue 8, I love the feel of them. Yeah, it doesn't quite feel like a Steve Ditko Doctor Strange, but the Lovecraft elements work, and the sort of more overt, spooky horror elements I think work perfectly with Doctor Strange. So I think this is a great run. Then we have issue 9. Here's where things really take off. I should say, all right, so issue 8 has a really interesting creative team. Gardner Fox is still writing. Jim Starlin's the artist. So there's your Doctor Strange creative team. But then with issue 9, as much as I love those issues, the decision to change creative teams pays off. Because issue 9, we get the death of the Ancient One, which I think is an important sort of part of the hero's journey. It's a very Joseph Campbell sort of, the mentor has to die, blah, blah, blah. But here we have issue 9, new creative team, Steve Englehart writing, Frank Brunner doing the pencils, and that's the Doctor Strange. If there's any Doctor Strange creative team other than Steve Ditko, this is it. This is the classic. And this is where their run begins. Not in Doctor Strange number 1. The Englehart Brunner run does not start in Doctor Strange number 1. It starts here in Marvel Premiere number 9. And then we get them in issue 10. Now, this is an issue that had gotten a bunch of heat. Like, the speculators were going crazy on this before the second Doctor Strange movie because they thought Shuma Gorath was going to be in the second Doctor Strange movie. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. And the value of this tanked right back down because it was really never worth anything to begin with. That was just dumb. But the story's great. So here's issue 10. These issues are tremendous. The art's great. Englehart at his peak. Here's a great, I love yellow covers. Here's a great yellow semi-frame. So it's got everything going for it. Frank Brunner just killing it. So good. Here's issue 12. This is all one big storyline. And it's absolutely great. This is the storyline that has to do with Cisneg. If you flip that around, it's Genesis. It's about God and the creation of the universe, which is a very Doctor Strange thing to get into. Cagliostro, Conquer the Cosmos, Death at the Dawn of Time. This is the end of the Cisneg storyline, where we get the creation of the universe. Absolutely fantastic. So that was the end of the run. Now for Marvel Premiere, I mentioned it earlier, the next issue is the first appearance of Iron Fist. So this book was kicking some butt. But Doctor Strange moves over to his own title. And that title ran for quite a long time. Started in 1970, whatever. Just blanked. Because I should mention that this book was bi-monthly. So like it was running from 3 to 14, but it was actually like 2 years of issues, and that continued with Doctor Strange. It eventually went monthly and then went back to bi-monthly. So that series ran from like 73 or 74 to around 86, but only got 81 issues because it was bi-monthly most of the time. But we'll talk about that next time because I do have a complete run of that series, all 81 issues. So next time around, we're going to dive into that. We're going to look at Doctor Strange numbers 1 to 40 or so. A lot of ups and downs. I have a number of them signed. I think I actually have one that's a British Pence variant even, which I don't have many of those, but I love them. So there's a lot to look forward to next time we look at Doctor Strange. But that's it for this time. Not a lot of comics here, but vitally important comics that all Doctor Strange fans need to get because they sort of fall in that gap between when you're a new collector, you might think, oh, well, Doctor Strange 183 ends and then the next series starts with number 1, but that's not the case. You have to get all of these to fill in the storyline in between those issues. I didn't really include the Submariners 35 where he guest stars. It sort of is the prototype for the Defenders because while this is going on, he's also in the Defenders, but that's not that important for the Doctor Strange as a character, so I didn't bother including those. The team stuff is very different than his solo book. But for his solo stuff, you want to get all of this Submariner 22, Marvel Feature 1, and then you have to get Marvel Premiere 3 to 14 for any of it to make sense. And it's just some of the best Doctor Strange stories are in these issues. So let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you next time.